Let me just start, and then I think that's a good question to raise everybody. Start these. Okay, so the question was asked, what happened to Richard Bushman? He's the guy who wrote this book. Was he ostracized or whatever? No, he has actually a high-ranking stake local position. He's not a general authority. He's a stake patriarch. He has a fairly reasonable position in the church. He's been a stake president, I understand, which is kind of like a bishop of a diocese in the Catholic tradition, almost the equivalent. No, he hasn't been. So when I was at BYU teaching there, I was reading this book in the back of one of the dean of religion at BYU's class, Terry Paul, and I was reading it in the back of his class. And he was teaching an Isaiah class, and I was sitting in on the back of his class because I was teaching an Isaiah class, and I was stealing his stuff. So I was sitting in, and he's a great teacher, by the way. I love the guy. I'm sitting in the back of his class reading this, and he comes up to me, he says, "So, what do you think of Refton ruling?" I said, and I thought, this could be a trick question. This guy's my boss. He decides whether I get to work here, and I kind of hedge and said, well, I'm just starting. I don't know yet. I thought that was a safe answer. He said, well, why'd you decide to read it? I said, well, some of your professors here said it was really good, a good history of Joseph. And he said, well, they didn't ask me. Got a whole few. Well, what's the problem? I said, well, do you think it's inaccurate? He said, no, it's not that. I said, well, what's wrong? And he said, well, if you kick a cow pie, it smells forever. If you just leave it alone, it scabs over. And I nodded and said, okay, that makes sense. And even then, I was a believer, and that just didn't. There's
some double think right there.
That doesn't work for me. And I think his point was, there's truth, and then there's things that are important, right? And there's things that are faith promoting, and we don't have to drag all the dirty laundry out every 5 minutes. And then I went to a conference by Richard Bushman about people who were losing their faith. And Bushman was speaking at this conference, and he kind of said, most people don't lose their faith over seer stones. Right? I mean, if you believe in, and frankly, we've kind of said this stuff in a way that it just sounds all really silly, but I want you to put your mind in this case of somebody who believes in the Bible. I mean, if you believe in the Bible where God is, striking stones and water's coming out and rods are turning into snakes, and there is something in the Bible called a Urim and Thummim, which is supposed to be some sort of a stone you can look in to get revelations. And the priests in the Bible used it in the Old Testament. So if you believe that stuff, this is the stuff you should expect. It's not out of the ordinary. It's not something you should. This is what the world should be like, right? Healing, visions, miracles, seer stones. That's the way the world should be if God is really here working with us. So Mormons view the loss of these sorts, especially in Joseph's day, the loss of these sorts of spiritual gifts is evidence of the gospel having been lost, that lost word. We're restoring the miracles. And the idea that God could work through a physical device, well, he does all the way through the Old Testament. There's nothing weird about that. So Bushman's point was people don't lose their testimony over the fact that Joseph used a seer stone. And they don't lose their testimony over the fact that Joseph Smith did some stupid things when he was a kid. We all do stupid things when we're a kid. That's how he frames Joseph's treasure seeking, right? People don't lose their testimony over the fact that Joseph did stupid things. People don't lose their testimony over the fact that Joseph used physical devices to get revelation. People lose their testimony because they feel like you've lied to them. So from Bushman's perspective, this was an inoculation. We inoculate them with the truth, and then they're not freaked out by it. And from Terry Ball's perspective, it was kicking a cow pie so that it smells forever instead of just leaving it alone. So these two views compete in Mormondom, and the Bushman's view became more popular after the internet because more and more people were having a hard time leaving the cow pie alone because someone would find it and give it to them, right? And so Bushman's view is becoming ever more popular. And when he wrote the book, he ticked a lot of people off. He made a lot of people angry, but he didn't get disciplined from the top because as far as I can tell, the leaders of the church today are split on the very issue of how open to be. And apparently that we need to be more open, Camp 1, because over the last 4 years they've been publishing the essays I told you about. that admit all these things. Right now it's on the official church webpage, which is really nice because I have all these friends, they go to their bishop and they're like, I'm leaving the church, or I'm frustrated with the church. And the bishop says, why? And they say, well, and they start talking about seer stones. And the bishop's like, oh, that's all nonsense. And they're like, no, church webpage. And so it's made a really big difference for my friends who are struggling, right? Because they now can go to something official on the church's page and say, look, this is real, And so no, Bushman didn't get in trouble. He did make some people angry, but he made some other people incredibly happy. And as a believer, I was firmly in Bushman's camp, right? If you went to my class at BYU and my Book of Mormon class, seer stones was the first thing we talked about, right? And there were people when the church published the seer stone picture who freaked out because they're like, I've never heard this before. And I'm like, well, you weren't in my class, clearly, right? So again, there's the people in Mormonism who never heard of it before, and then there's the people who have, and they deal with the information differently. And so there really is kind of a warring camp in the LDS church is what I'm talking about. The other kind of branch of Mormonism dealt with this stuff a long time ago. We'll probably talk about them when we talk about the history of the church. But
what's the other branch called?
Today they're called the Community of Christ. They were originally the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and then the Mormon church is the LDS church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they just tacked reorganized on the front. And they're the group who followed Emma, Joseph's wife. So one of us followed Brigham Young. The group stayed behind and followed Emma. And Brigham Young was by far the biggest group. And Emma's son became their next prophet, which was Joseph's son. And they formed the reorganized church. It's almost like the Shia Sunni because they had the son of Joseph as their prophet, and we had the president of the 12 apostles as ours. So the question is, does the authority follow Joseph's lineage, or does it follow the priesthood authority that Joseph put together when he was here? I mean, I think clearly if you just kind of look at Joseph's theology, Brigham Young has more right to lead the church than Joseph Smith III. So I mean, in that sense, Brigham is right. But what happened to the saints who stayed behind is they denied polygamy, while Brigham Young continued to practice it. At first, they said all the claims that Joseph practiced polygamy were lies. That was really hard to maintain when all the people who had followed Brigham Young said, I was one of Joseph's wives, and they started signing affidavits saying that they'd been married to Joseph. And one of the reasons we have the affidavits and so much documentation of Joseph Smith's polygamy is because the Mormons in Utah were trying to convince the Mormons who had stayed behind that Joseph really had practiced polygamy. And Emma was lying when she said he hadn't. And Emma knew that he had practiced polygamy and lied about it. And they said, and we know that because a list of women who signed affidavits saying they were married to Joseph, right?
When you say left behind, you mean
as they wandered, right?
Okay.
Mormons were in Nauvoo. We'll get to where they were, and then they were kicked out, and Emma stayed behind, and Brigham Young went west to Utah.
Okay, that's what I
And so that's them. Emma left Nauvoo and went back to Missouri at some point.
Okay.
And, well, her group went back to Missouri. So there's the Missouri church, which is the reorganized or the Community of Christ, and then there's the Utah church. And they were debating about polygamy. Now what happened was the reorganized church was getting hammered on polygamy. And at some point, they gave up and they said, yep, Joseph practiced polygamy. And then they were like, and the Utah saints were like, see, you should have been one of us all along. And they didn't do that. They said, well, apparently Joseph did a lot of things that are kind of weird, and we're not sure we agree with all of them. And they went off into this other direction, right? And they dealt with all this history stuff, the seer stones and everything, and just said, yeah, isn't it great that sometimes even a weird person can sometimes be inspired? And we're not even sure how inspired. Maybe the Book of Mormon is just a great book of fiction, and you can believe in it. If you want to believe it's historical, you can, but that's not required. And they're almost they've become almost a liberal Christian denomination that would have a lot in common with us.
That's what it sounds like.
That's the Community of Christ. And they would have, to some extent, they would have some in common with us because they would see Joseph as inspired, but they would see him as a deeply flawed human who was only sort of inspired. And what that does is call all of us to be inspired, right?
Okay.
It calls us to be inspired and to be flawed, and they embrace that as part of their tradition. And it's actually kind of beautiful, right? I mean, I wasn't quite sure when I left the church. Do I go hang out with the RLDS people, or do I come here? Right? So that's kind of the history. But now our church, the LDS church, is starting to face some of the same history problems. A little later because polygamy was easier, but now we're starting to deal with things like the seer stone and some of this other stuff, and the LDS church doesn't quite know what to do with it. And the question is, are they going to double down? Are they going to become more liberal like our LDS church and admit Joseph's failings and stuff? And it's going to be interesting to watch. All right, so what's Joseph's story now? That's a great lead into Joseph's story. Well, remember the awakenings? In the middle of the awakenings, now I'm going to just tell Joseph's story the way he tells it, because I don't know what really happened, right? But this is the story he tells. In the middle of the Great Awakening, Joseph is confused about what church he should join, and he thinks it's important to know because his salvation depends on it. So he reads the Bible. Seems like a good place to start, right? So he's going to read the Bible and figure out which church is true. But this story really resonates with me, because I want to know what church is true. So I'm going to go study the Bible because I'm a smart dude, and I'm going to figure out which one's right? So you're going to decide which of these salvation doctrines is right, which of these, and all of them appeal to the Bible. So Joseph reads the Bible, and he says, then he would go to the ministers and listen to them preach, and he said, they destroyed my hope in settling the question by appealing to the Bible, because they all interpreted the Bible so differently. Same words, but they would interpret it differently, so I can't tell what's true. Right? And this was, I know you grew up Jehovah's Witness. I would debate with Jehovah's Witnesses all the time on my mission. And what would always strike me about it is they would say, this is what's true, and I know it because I read the Bible. Right? And so they had this theology that was so different than mine because they prove it from the Bible. But I could prove mine from the Bible too, and I felt like there was no superiority in their view over mine. I didn't think mine was superior. I mean, at some point I was finally humbled into realizing it wasn't. But I didn't think theirs was superior either. And that was the place Joseph was in. Which one of these is right? And Joseph says, this is dumb. God doesn't save the best Bible scholar. How do you find out what's right? Do you study it all day in the Bible? The more people know about the Bible, the more they disagree about it. That's obviously true, right? If you go to these Bible-believing churches, the more you study it, the more confusing the bloody thing becomes. When you're trying to answer these salvation questions anyway. So finally, Joseph says, I need something else. And he's reading the Bible one day, and he comes to James 1:5, and it says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering, for he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. Of course, he's reading the King James, so that's what I get to quote at you, right? And Joseph goes, aha, that's it. So I used to have in my library at home a picture of this picture was hanging on my wall, and it's Joseph reading James 1:5. And the reason that was meaningful to me is because I would consider myself a Bible scholar. Right? I'm sitting here studying the Bible, trying to find out what it means. Because that's what I do. I like it. It's fun, right? And I'm going to study the Scriptures. But there was something about the humility of saying, I don't get it. My interpretation isn't what really matters. This is a fun game to study. But what matters is to go ask God. So here we have Joseph's study telling him to do something other than study, which is to actually get direct evidence from God. And he says in his history, if God really loves us and cares about us, why in the world wouldn't he just tell us? So Joseph wanders off into the trees by his home, and he kneels down to pray, and God tells him. And here's where the story gets hard, because there's about 5 accounts of them, and they're all different, and they evolve with Joseph's theology. The earliest accounts talk about seeing angels. The later accounts talk about seeing God. And then after Joseph becomes something of a universal Unitarian, where he believes God and Christ are separate, he talks about seeing 2 persons. He loses his Trinity belief. And after he loses his Trinity belief, now suddenly he's seeing 2 persons in this first vision that happened a long time ago. Again, the fact that there's different accounts aren't that weird. We all give different accounts of our own stories. The fact that it sort of evolves with his own theology is one of those things that bothered me a little bit. Or one of the reasons I had questions. But here it is, the most important event in church history. Joseph goes into the woods, and by the way, there's parallels to Buddhism and just all sorts of fun things. He goes to, and I don't know, Muhammad, everybody has this experience. They go alone to pray, they kneel down, and Satan attacks them. Or in Buddha's case, there's a big thunderstorm, and he's wet, and he's trying to concentrate it, and the thunder is pealing, and the rain is pouring down, and he's soaked to the bone, but he continues to meditate. And For Joseph, remember that's the Buddha, right? So for Joseph, he goes down, he kneels down, and he hears someone behind him, and he's afraid. And then he feels a force that binds his tongue, and he can't speak. And he's tempted with sexual sins and all sorts of things. Temptations come into his mind, and he says, "God, help me!" And he says, a light appears. And as soon as the light appears, he loses the being that had been attacking him disappears. And again, this is another great source for good Mormon sermons, right? As soon as you appeal to God, the temptations disappear. So God beats away the temptations for him. And then a pillar of light appears, and in his later versions, two personages appear. One of them says, "This is my beloved son, hear him." And then Jesus speaks to him and says his sins were forgiven. There's a long list of things that he asks him which church to go to, and he says none of them are right. You shouldn't join any of them. And then he goes home. No real indication that one day you're going to start your own church. Just none of them are right. They're all corrupt. Their creeds are an abomination. By the way, this is one of those. It's very harsh. It's not just they're good people, but they're confused. They're all messed up, and their creeds are an abomination. And don't join any of them. And their preachers are all corrupt. And right. So Joseph goes home. Years go by. And then they're in this log cabin home, and they're building this nicer home. Now Joseph has like 4 or 5 brothers and sisters, some huge number of brothers and sisters, and they're living in that while they're building that. And while he's there, this is the upper. There's 2 stories to this house. This is the upper story, and this is what it kind of looked like. You have to, if you go in here, which I have, this is my picture. You have to bend over just to fit. Joseph was sitting in one of these beds with his other brothers and sisters, and he's sound asleep. I picked this bed because it's in the back right corner, which is how the artist draws it. Well, the artist gives him much more headroom. Although I think this cabin has been rebuilt, so I don't know if we actually know how much headroom they had. The house, by the way, is original, but the cabin, I think, has been rebuilt, as I remember. But on the original foundations, they
And
did
where
some.
was this again?
This is in. They've moved from Vermont. They're in New York. They're in Palmyra, New York.
And about how old is he?
At this point, he's 22, I think. No, shoot, he's younger. Because when did you say he restored the church? He was
I started church, I think when he was 24.
24?
Or 23, he wrote the full Book of Mormon.
right. So this would be 3 years. So he's 19 or 20. And an angel appears to him in either a dream or he wakes up and sees it. It's not quite clear. The angel will appear 3 times. The angel says his name is Moroni. Moroni is the son of a person named Mormon. Moroni says he lived in America a long time ago, 400 BC or so, or 400 AD, sorry. He lived around 400 AD. His father's name was Mormon. And that Mormon and Moroni had written a book together, written on golden plates. And Joseph is told that if he's worthy, he'll be chosen to translate this book and bring forth that which was lost. So again, notice the Masonic connections with the gold plates with the name written on it. But there's golden plates that you can use to restore what is lost. That's an artist's depiction, but that's about the description. Joseph describes them as a book written with 3 rings, and a portion of them are sealed, so he's not allowed to translate those. But the unsealed portion, this has the real mysteries of God, right? We're not allowed to translate that. If you're worthy, someday you'll get them, is actually what they can be restored. But here's the portion that he translates, or that he says he translates, and the angel says this stuff is buried in a hill. It happens 3 times. Joseph then was so tired the next morning, he went out to work for his father, and was so tired his dad sent him home. And on the way home, he fell down next to the fence, which is there. You see the fence. Joseph falls down next to this fence. And let's see, Joseph's father told him to go home and have his mother doctor him. He accordingly ceased his work and started home, but was so weak he could proceed no further. The messenger whom he had seen the previous night visited him again, and the first thing he said was, "Why did you not tell your father that which I commanded you to tell him?" Joseph replied, "I was afraid my father would not believe me." The angel says, "He will believe every word you say. Go tell him." Joseph goes and tells him. Then his dad said, "It's a vision from God. Go do it." Now again, his father. Are we surprised? It's a vision from God. Go do what the angel says. So Joseph looks. Now this is the part of the story that usually gets left out of correlation. Joseph looks in his seer stone, the gray the brown, black, stripy one, and has a vision in the seer stone of where on the hill this thing is buried. His official account says he goes to the hill, but he had seen it so clearly in vision, he knew the spot immediately when he found it. Right? But if we go back to the treasure-seeking thing, we have a guardian spirit named Moroni. We have a buried treasure, gold, with that which was lost restored, that Joseph finds by looking at his seer stone. Now, Joseph, at some point, he tries to marry Emma, and Emma's father says, you can only marry my daughter if you give up all this treasure-seeking nonsense. And Joseph says he will. Then he starts telling them about the Book of Mormon, and he says, you said you were going to give up the treasure-seeking. He says, this is different. And his father-in-law says, how? Which is a really good question. How is this different? There's the hill where he found them. It's called the Hill Cumorah. At least that's the name it's given in the book, so that's the name it's known by today. If you go to the Palmyra, there's a Hill Cumorah pageant where they will tell the story of the Book of Mormon on the Hill Cumorah, and they'll reenact it. It's a really big play thing. It's almost as cool as the Book of Mormon musical, but put on by Mormons. You can see up here this statue. This is where they put on the play. It's an outdoor kind of play. It's really great. It's fun. Go see it. It's in Palmyra, New York. And then here is the statue of the angel Moroni giving the book to Joseph on the top of the hill. No one knows where on the hill it happened, but there's a statue there. I went to the place where the messenger had told me the plates were deposited, and owing to the distinctness of the vision which I had had concerning it in his seer stone, I knew the place the instant I arrived there. Having removed the earth, so he digs. Having removed the earth, I looked in. First, there's a stone. He moves earth around the stone. He puts a lever in and pries the stone up. And inside, he says, there's a box. Indeed, I saw the plates inside this box. He says he makes an attempt to take them out. Now, notice, here we have the treasure-seeking guardian. Is he worthy of the treasure? You have to prove your worthiness or you can't get the treasure. So I made an attempt to take them out, but was forbidden by the messenger. He told me that I should come back to that place precisely in 1 year from that time, and he would there meet with me. This is the official history. So here's the unofficial sort of stories. In 1823, during Joseph's first visit to Cumorah, 2 invisible powers were operating upon his mind during his walk from his residence to Cumorah. Now, what are those? He's poor. These are golden plates, right? I can get rich. No sooner did he behold the sacred treasure than he thought perhaps there might be something more equally as valuable that he could secure. Now, why is he looking for something more? Because the angel tells him in his vision, you can't use the plates to get rich. The plates are for spiritual purposes only. So Joseph goes there and he's like, well, if I can't use the plates to get rich, is there something else in here? Equally as valuable, which he could secure. On attempting to take possession of the record, a shock was produced upon his system. He made another attempt and was more severely shocked. He made a third attempt but was increased shocked. He actually says he's knocked backwards and he exclaimed, why can't I obtain the book? And then to his astonishment, there stood the angel. They are not deposited here for the sake of accumulating gain and wealth. They are no worth to the children of men, only for their knowledge. This is one of those, not official histories, but
So is this, I'm remembering the movie Indiana Jones and the Ark of the Covenant there.
you know as much as I do at this point, right?
Okay.
So
Well, because I don't even know the biblical Ark story stuff, so that, I don't know.
yeah, so there's this guy who touches the ark and is killed by the shock in the biblical story. That's a whole nother.
So is it like a rehashing, sort of?
Possibly.
Could be.
I think more it's a guardian treasure seeking myth, and Joseph has to purify his mind before he can get the record. So he comes back a year later. He visits the place where he found the plates, and uncovering the plates, he puts his hand in and took them up. But as he was taking them hence, an unhappy thought darted through his head that maybe there was something else in the box beside the plates, which would be of some peculiar advantage to him. So in the moment of excitement, he laid them down very carefully, and he turned around to take the record again, but behold, it was gone, because he had been commanded to not lay down the plates or put them away for a moment out of his hands until he got to the house and deposited them in chest or trunk, having good lock and key. And contrary to this, he had laid them down, and in his view, securing some fancied or imagined treasure that remained. This is Lucy Mack Smith's story of what happened. This is this book. This is the other probably really good biography of Joseph everyone should read, because it's by his mother, Lucy Mack Smith. it's been highly edited and redacted by Brigham and others to try to make it more palatable, I think. And so this is a we have the original manuscripts though, so this is a scholar's edition, sort of a critical edition, I guess is the right word. You've got the changes and you've got the original, and you can kind of see all the differences. So this was fascinating. I got this. I was really excited. But this is from Lucy's version of the story. So he has to be tested and proved that, or he can't get them. So having gone as usual at the end of another year to the place where they were deposited, the same heavenly messenger delivered them up to me with this charge that I should be responsible for them, and that if I should let them go carelessly or through any neglect of mine, I should be cut off. No sooner was it known that I had them than the most strenuous exertions were used to get them from me. The persecutions became more bitter and severe than ever, but they remained safe in my hands until I had accomplished by them what was required at my hands. What he's not quite telling you is that Joseph had made a covenant with his other treasure seekers that if any of them found a treasure, they would share it. So when Joseph comes back one day after, finally, he goes 4 years, by the way. This is the account. He goes 4 years and is instructed by the angel and taught, and finally he's purified enough to get the record. He goes and he gets the record. He comes home, and Sally Chase, remember her? Sally Chase starts looking in her seer stone, trying to figure out where Joseph has the plates buried, so her treasure seekers can go find them and take them from Joseph so they can get rich. Because Joseph has found a treasure and he's hiding it from them. So now we get this battle of the warring seers, right? The stories are really fun. Joseph buries the plates first in a cooper shed, and then he thinks maybe they're not safe, so he takes them home and he buries them under his fireplace, under some loose bricks. And Sally, the next day, shows up with the treasure seekers and ransacks the cooper shed. And the question is, how did Sally know the plates were in the cooper shed? Well, she's looking in her seer stone. And then Joseph takes them up out of the thing under the floorboards of his fireplace and buries them out in the woods. And sure enough, the treasure seekers come into Joseph's house, terrorize the family, and dig up the bricks of the fireplace. So there's this really fun stories in church history. You're like, where does this come from? And does he even have plates? Right? Because he only shows them to a certain group of people, but there's a whole bunch of people who feel them through a pillowcase. His wife included. She says she never saw them, but she felt them and lifted them, and they were heavy metal plates. She could feel the plates rustling and feel the shape of the book. So Joseph's got something, I think, right? But where did he get it? How did he make it? And what's with all the witnesses who say they saw it, including at least 3 who say they saw the angel, who told them that it was not only real but from God and translated correctly. They saw the plates. And so the Book of Mormon starts out with a list of witnesses of people who saw it, who testify that they know it was true because they saw it, and they die, every one of them, on their deathbed, telling people they know the book is true. Every one of them, right? So there's this really strange, where does this come from? How is Joseph doing this? And then there's a whole list of other people who felt them, and what were they feeling? So Joseph's carrying something around and hiding something, and other people are trying to get it from him. So when he says the persecutions got really intense, it's because the other treasure seekers want his gold. So he goes to his father-in-law's to finish the translation, and he hides there. Here's some more pictures of Joseph getting the plates. Buried with the plates was what was called the Urim and Thummim, which Joseph describes as 2 3-cornered stones set in glass, set in bows or rims, which are intended for the translation of the plates. He calls them the Urim and Thummim, and in fact, they're the first thing he shows his mother. When he gets home, he pulls out the Urim and Thummim, and she's nervous. She says, "Did you get them? Did you get the plates?" And he pulls out the Urim and says, "Never fear, mother, all is well. See here, I have got the key." So now we go back to the Masonic legend. Remember the key that helps you translate the ineffable characters written on the gold plate? So there's your key. In fact, if you watch the Da Vinci Code, you remember the keystone that he has to find to figure out where the thing is buried? That's the key that decrypts the... Right? This is the same tradition. This is the lost word restored by the use of the key. And these are the keys. So supposedly he's supposed to look through these stones and see the translation. And he uses the stones to translate. According to some of our sources, he'll use this Urim and Thummim to translate the first 116 pages of the book. This is some characters supposedly copied down from the plates. This is what the plate characters look like. They look like no ancient language anyone has ever seen or probably ever will see. But according to church history, Joseph gave that to his then scribe, who took them to a guy named Antoine, who was a translator of ancient languages, a real translator. And he brought these characters and a translation. And apparently Antoine looks at it and says, oh yeah, those characters look authentic. This is according to Martin Harris, the scribe. Characters look authentic. And the translation looks good. Bring it to me and I'll translate it. Now that sounds like the sort of BS somebody might pull if they looked at stuff and said, oh yeah, maybe this is an ancient book, but I don't know anything about it. But yeah, bring it to me and I'll translate it, right? I mean, I can imagine some scholar saying this. And he says, well, an angel got it to us, and part of the book is sealed. And Antoine says famously, I can't read a sealed book. Now, if you're a scribe, or if you're an aficionado of Isaiah, there's a line in Isaiah about a marvelous work and a wonder that would come forth at the last days, when the words of the book will be delivered to the learned, and they shall say, I cannot read a sealed book, and they'll be delivered to the words of the unlearned, and he will say, I am not learned, but nevertheless God will do a marvelous work and a wonder, etc. And so Antoine just fulfilled Isaiah's prophecy, and the prophecy was actually about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. And Martin Harris is now convinced. And that's the story Martin Harris tells. The story, when Antoine is confronted with this later, he will say, I never said that at all. I said it looked like nonsense to me. I actually am not sure what Antoine really said. I can imagine somebody stroking his ego and pretending he knows when he doesn't, right? But I don't know what really happened there. But supposedly it fulfilled these. Now, how many of you have seen South Park? Have you seen the South Park episode about Book of Mormon? Where no?
Sounds familiar.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so at this point, Joseph dictates to his scribe, Martin Harris, 116 pages of the story, presumably the book of Lehi, the first patriarch of the Book of Mormon. He dictates 116 pages. Martin Harris writes this stuff down. So what we have in the 116 pages is Moroni and Mormons. That's why it's called the Book of Mormon, because Mormon abridges all the records that came before him. So this guy Mormon abridges the records of all the other prophets before him, the first of them in the book being Lehi. So presumably 116 pages of Mormon's abridgment of the Book of Lehi. Okay. Martin Harris's wife thinks he's being duped by Joseph. Martin Harris insists that Joseph is on the level. She says, well, bring me the manuscript so I can see what you're working on. And Joseph prays, and God says, it's not safe to let the manuscript out of your hands. Don't do it. Joseph tells Martin no, and his wife gives him heck. And Martin comes back to Joseph and says, please. And Joseph says, no. And God says, no. And Martin says, please. And Joseph comes to God a third time and says, can I just give him the... And God says, fine. You can give him the record if you, under these conditions. He has to keep it locked. He has to, blah, blah. He can only show it to a certain number of people. So Joseph gives the manuscript to Martin Harris. Martin Harris takes the 116 pages home, shows them to his wife, and about 50 other people he's not supposed to. He breaks the rules that God had given that were conditioned upon him taking it home, and he comes in one day and it's gone. I'm almost certain that his wife burned the bloody thing. But we don't know what happened to it. It vanishes. So Martin comes back to Joseph and says, I don't have it, it's gone. And Joseph says, my God, I've lost my soul. What have I done? I should have been happy with the first answer God gave me. And he goes back to God, and this is great cannon fodder for great Mormon sermons about, if you just beg long enough, God says, go ahead, hang yourself, So Joseph loses the manuscript. And then God takes away the Urim and Thummim and the plates. According to the story, they go back up into heaven. The angel takes them from him, I guess. So he doesn't have the Urim and Thummim anymore. He doesn't have the plates. He begs for forgiveness. He humbles himself in sackcloth and ashes, and then eventually the plates are restored, but not the Urim and Thummim. So Joseph pulls out his trusty seer stones, sticks it in a hat to exclude the light, and says he can see the words presumably on the plates, and the translation would appear in his stone, and his scribe would write down what he dictates off of his stone.
So can Joseph write? Why does he have to have a scribe?
I think it's the issue is he's busy staring at his stone. So yes, he can write. He writes beautiful letters. He's very, very articulate, and he also has an amazing memory. He will dictate revelations and then redictate them word for word later. So he has an amazing memory. but no one knows how he. This is one of those challenges Mormons give you. If you don't believe the Book of Mormon, you write, a 300-page book from memory, while with your head stuck in a hat. Although most Mormons don't know he did it with his head stuck in a hat, because this story here with the Urim and Thummim is the story they tell, and then they forget to tell you that they were taken and that the rest of the book wasn't translated with the Urim and Thummim. So most Mormons think it was translated with the Urim and Thummim, not with the seer stone. And what they don't know is it's the 116 pages that was translated that way. The rest was done with the seer stone with Joseph's head in a hat. And that means every page of the Book of Mormon you have today came that way, not the other way. And yet every church depiction of the story shows Joseph with the plates in front of him with the Urim and Thummim, reading them through this key. And that's not how any of the pieces we have today happened. And so this is the other reason people are losing their heads with the publication of the seer stone, because now they're admitting this is the seer stone, quote, he used while translating the Book of Mormon. And most people, he used what while translating what, right? And this is why they're all losing their heads. Go ahead.
So do we have those 116 pages? Do they
Nope.
get retranslated, or they're gone?
They're gone.
Wow.
Okay, so here's where the story gets fun, right? The 116 pages are gone. What does he do? He could retranslate, right? If it's there in front of him, he could just retranslate it, right? This is one of those stories that never made any sense to me. Well, so one of the revelations is, they stole it from you, and the reason they stole it from you is they're gonna change it. They've got some evil people are trying to trick you, and they've got the manuscript, and they're going to change it. And if you retranslate the same stuff, they'll bring out the other one and say, look, they're not the same, so you're not a real prophet. So don't retranslate that. So just keep going. So he does. He just keeps going. So when he picks up the translation, he starts exactly where he left off, like right in the middle, and he just keeps going. And he gets clear to the end, and out comes Moroni pipes up at the end of the book, and he's like, so I found this copy of Nephi. Nephi is Lehi's son. This is presumably the book of Lehi was what was lost. So here's Nephi, Lehi's son, and I abridged Lehi's record, but Nephi's record was just so cool, I'm going to include it entire. So now Moroni copies Nephi's record at the end of his record. So now we've got the story, the part that was lost is now, we've got another telling of it. We don't have the part that was lost, but we've got another telling of the same material from Nephi stuck at the end. And of course then they reorder it and put the Nephi stuff at the front, but anyway, it translated the other direction.
When was Moroni supposed to have lived?
400 AD? Yeah, and Nephi 600 BC. So Moroni and his father Mormon abridge 1,000 years of history. And the Book of Mormon then covers that from 600 BC to 400 AD when Moroni lives and then buries it. Moroni then buries it and then dies and becomes the guardian spirit to his own buried treasuries. So this is how it was actually translated. And again, this is not the story most Mormons have heard, but it is now. Right? It's in October Ensign. When the October Ensign hits their door, they're going to be reading this if they haven't read it online yet.
But so he has to have the plate in his hat.
No, so the plates, this is the other thing, the plates never show up.
Oh.
Right? So God says the plates have been given back to him. So presumably when he translated with the Urim and Thummim, he would look at the plates, presumably. We don't know exactly how that happened because Martin Harris never really told us. But when he does this translation, the plates are hidden to keep them from the treasure seekers, and he puts his head in the hat and says he sees a vision in the seer stone of the plates with the text and the translation under it. And Martin Harris is no longer his scribe at this point. Oliver Cowdery becomes his scribe because Martin is punished for losing the record. Oliver Cowdery becomes his scribe, and they translate the rest of the book. And that's it. Well, this is the printer's manuscript. So this time Joseph is a little smarter. He's got a manuscript that's the original manuscript, and most of that has been damaged throughout. We got fragments of that. But then they took the original manuscript and they made a copy called the printer's manuscript. I guess they learned from the 116 pages mistake. And so this is the printer's manuscript, which we have almost entire, and that was sent to E.B. Grandin, who published the first edition. So we have fragments of the original manuscript in Oliver Cowdery's handwriting, and then we've got the printer's manuscript. And again, you can compare that to then what gets published. You can compare that to then what gets changed. So there's all sorts of textual things you can do with the Book of Mormon that are really exciting that you can't do with the Bible. Right? The Bible we would kill for the original manuscripts. In the Book of Mormon, we have them. So here's the E.B. Grandin printing press. He owned a shop, there, and it's still there, and so you can go there. And of course, the church bought his shop years later and reestablished his shop and put the
And this
printing
is
shop
in
back.
Palmyra?
This where is the E.B. Grandin? I think it's in Palmyra. I'm not sure, but see, Joseph does the translation somewhere else and then comes back, so I'm not sure exactly where the shop is. It's in New York somewhere, so if you go to New York on a Mormon church history tour, they'll take you there. I've been there. That's actually a picture I took, at the bottom right. That's my mom, standing off to the side here, I think. And so there's the first edition, published in 1830, and there's my facsimile of the first edition over there on the side if anyone wants to thumb through it. It's fascinating. 590 pages. Monumental biblical thing. Reads like you're reading the Bible, full of, and it came to passes and that sort of stuff. And it is, how to describe this? It is an impressive book. So, I mean, most of us have been sitting here saying, how can people believe this stuff? Go read it. Mark Twain called it chloroform in print. But it's not the most entertaining book. But, you could say the same thing about Leviticus, right? If you've ever read Leviticus. And it reads like that. But it is impressive, and it's covered and filled with deep understanding of biblical symbolism, textual understanding. Whoever wrote the thing not only understood what the Bible was saying, but they understood some of the language puns that were in Hebrew. That, how did Joseph know? I mean, there's passages in Hebrew where they make puns on biblical words that don't show up in translation, and yet those same sort of puns are used correctly in the Book of Mormon, in places where they shouldn't be. I mean, it's insane. I have no idea how Joseph did this. I still don't. I don't claim to, but it's a brilliant text, and it's a moving story, but written in a biblical style. Yeah. That's probably Ethan Smith's view of the Hebrews. Well, there was another one. That's this Spalding manuscript. It's a conspiracy theory. We don't have that novel. We have 2 manuscripts of it. One of the manuscripts we have, it looks nothing like it. So there are similarities in kind of the idea that the Unions are a lost tribe of Israel. Other than that, if you haven't read the Book of Mormon, it's something you should go read the Quran. Go read the Book of Mormon. It's something you should read once in your life. I mean, it's before you die. If you can get through the chloroform, it gets really bad when he starts quoting Isaiah in 2nd Nephi. In fact, the Mormons will make all sorts of jokes about that. There was an apostle was giving a talk about the Book of Mormon and how great it is, and he says, but we'll skip over for so much great stuff in 1st Nephi, but we'll skip 1st Nephi. Let's go to 2nd Nephi, because none of you have read 2nd Nephi. Because everyone get through 1st Nephi, and then he starts quoting Isaiah. Nephi, the character, quotes Isaiah in blocks, and of course no one in Mormondom understands Isaiah, so they lose it, and that's when most people stop reading. If you can barrel your way through the Isaiah chapters, the rest is easy. I taught Isaiah, so they were my favorite chapters. So here, let me tell you the story of the Book of Mormon, and then we got to go because we're out of time. Here's the story of the Book of Mormon in brief. It starts in Jerusalem. This is in 600 BC. There's a prophet there named Jeremiah. You've probably heard his name. And he's telling the people in Jerusalem that if they do not repent, the Babylonians are going to come and destroy them. No one believes him, and they throw him in jail. In the Bible, it says several other prophets, who remain unnamed, are also prophesying along with Jeremiah and are also being persecuted. Enter Book of Mormon. One of those prophets' name is Lehi. And he's busy telling everyone in Jerusalem that they need to repent or they will be destroyed. Oh, and he also tells them that a Messiah is coming who will redeem them from their sins. This is also not in the Bible. The Book of Mormon, this is the other thing about it. The Book of Mormon has a version of the Old Testament style prophet that is much more explicit about the coming of Christ. And then the Book of Mormon claims that there were those same explicit teachings in the old Bible, but they'd been removed by people who were trying to hide the coming of Christ. The devil was trying to take away the plain and precious thing. So the Book of Mormon has very Christ-centered prophecies happening in Jerusalem in 600 BC by this prophet named Lehi. And the people don't like primarily his statement that they're going to be destroyed. After all, that is actually kind of treasonous. I mean, one of the ways you lose a city is if everyone panics. If there's a siege coming and they surround the city and people are saying we're all going to die, that's kind of treasonous. So they don't like that very much, and they persecute Lehi for that. But they also persecute him for this Christ stuff, because that's kind of violations of the law of Moses. Sort of, they're mad at him for blasphemy. Right? At some point, he says, "Well, these guys are mad at us. We're going to leave." And he has several kids. 2 of them are really unhappy because they're rich, and they don't want to leave all their money. But the other 2 are, whatever you say, Dad. If God says we need to leave, we'll go with you. One of them is named Nephi, and Nephi is even better than that. He says, well, I'm going to go find out if God is talking to my dad, because I'm going to go ask God if God is talking to my dad. And he has these great visions. And then he goes and then his dad has a vision. And Nephi's like, well, what does your vision mean? So he goes and prays about it. And then he comes up and he interprets his dad's vision to his brothers, who are busy debating the meaning of his dream. He says, why are you debating my dad's dream? Why didn't you ask God? I asked God. Here's what the dream means. Right? So this is Nephi, right? Nephi is the voice of the story. Yeah, it's a great way to win an argument. This is what God said the story. So Nephi tells the story. Nephi is this great hero. He goes back into Jerusalem to get a copy of the Bible to take with them into the wilderness. And he tries to buy it from this guy who owns this copy of the Bible, supposedly written on brass plates. Gold plates, brass plates, Bible, Book of Mormon. I don't know what he's trying to say there, but the Bible's written on brass plates, and we don't have any kind of full biblical text by written on plates like this in a book. But anyway, he claims there was one in Jerusalem, and he needed to take it with him. So he goes to this guy and tries to get the book. And the guy says, oh, I'm not going to give you my book. I mean, it's a treasure, and he finds out Nephi is rich, so Nephi offers to buy it. So he steals all Nephi's stuff and keeps the book. So his brothers go out into the front of and they're hiding from, and then he tries to kill them, right? So this guy tries to kill Nephi and his brothers. And they go running out to the wall, and they hide by the wall in Jerusalem. And his brothers start beating Nephi, his older brothers, right? And they're beating him up, and they're like, you're getting us killed. You've made us lose all our money. We hate you. We hate our father. He's so mean. And an angel comes and shocks them or something. And Nephi says, just repent and trust. And he says, you trust. I don't want to go back there. I don't want to die. Nephi says, fine, I'll show you. So he walks back into Jerusalem, says, trust in the Lord. And he just wanders through the streets, and he finds Laban, the guy with the plates, drunk in front of him on the street. So he pulls out Laban's sword, cuts off his head, puts on his clothes, goes back into his house, tells his servant to go get the plates. The servant brings him the plates. He takes them, wanders out with the servant, and then when the servant realizes it's not his master, it's Nephi, he tries to run away. Nephi grabs him, wrestles him to the ground, and says, if you come with us, I promise you'll be okay. The guy says, great. Out of nowhere, well, Nephi gives an oath. This is one of those stories, right? Sounds crazy, and all the Mormons are like, don't you understand? When people gave oaths in the ancient world, they meant it. I mean, this is authentic ancient Israel. It actually is. It's pretty impressive. So he gives an oath, and the guy immediately is like, okay, if you swear I'll be okay, I must. I mean, these guys were serious about oaths, right? And so he goes with them into the wilderness. They go back to Nephi's dad. Nephi's dad's all excited. They offer sacrifices. They praise the Lord, and they wander through the wilderness, led by God. And this is Nephi and his Lehi in the background, and his 2 annoying brothers who don't believe here. You got to have them, right? They wander through the wilderness. They get to the ocean, and Nephi builds a boat under direction of God. So here's where some of the biblical symbolism comes in, because you remember how Moses goes up to a mountain and is told how to build the temple? Nephi goes up to a mountain and is told how to build this boat, and it's very similar. It's a repeat of the Moses story, and the boat is the temple. And the temple's job is to carry you through the promised land, through the dangers to the promised land. And this whole ocean that they cross borrows on Egyptian mythology, where the sky is blue because it's made out of water, and you sail across the sky to the promised land, where the promised land is a symbol of heaven. I mean, all this borrows straight from ancient Near Eastern mythology. How Joseph gets all this in there, I have no idea. It's brilliant stuff. He builds this boat, sails across the ocean to the promised land, directed by this Liahona that only works if you're righteous, and when his brothers start sinning, it stops working, and then they almost are lost at sea, but they repent, and then they make it there.
Is that like rock like that?
Yeah, it's a little rock thing that he's using to guide himself.
Look into a hat and
yeah. So Nephi, well, this is the Liahona. It's actually this golden ball that they find with a compass that guides them in the wilderness. But it's another one of these gadgets sort of ideas. It's God works through these gadgets. But the gadgets work if you're righteous and have faith. Otherwise, they stop working. And that's taught in the Book of Mormon stories that sail through the ocean. And that, again, if this is a parable for your life, watch how this works. You're taught by a father, by a figure who says he's been inspired by God. You're Nephi. You find out if he really is inspired by God by asking. God then inspires you. Now you're a prophet in your own right. You are guided by God through the wilderness to the Vale, the promised land, and you sail across the ocean to the promised land by building the boat, which is the gospel and the teachings that sail you across the ocean and land you in the promised land. That's exactly the story of the Exodus. And those are the same parables that the Exodus story tells intentionally.
Well, it's also the story of Joseph Smith.
It's also the story of Joseph Smith's life. Nephi is Joseph Smith with a father, Lehi. So you can see Joseph's pulling elements from the Bible. He's pulling elements from his life.
But it doesn't call back to the Ark story, the Noah story at all.
Well, it's not Noah's Ark. It's the Ark of the Covenant, actually. The boat that sails you across the Promised Land and parts the River Jordan is the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
And so, yes, Noah's Ark, but this is the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
That crosses the water, the River Jordan, into the Promised Land after traveling in the wilderness of the desert. Only this Promised Land now is America. Once they get there, Nephi's evil brother, his father dies. His evil brothers try to kill him. They sneak off into the wilderness, taking the plates and the sword. They have and the Liahona. The Liahona is the compass. So there's certain, they're kind of the crown jewels of the Nephite culture. These are the artifacts they bring with them from Jerusalem, right? Nephi takes those things with him into the wilderness of America to get away from his brothers who are trying to kill him. And the brothers then spread the rumor that the Nephites robbed them. Nephites have this feeling that the brothers tried to kill them, and these become two warring nations who disagree with each other. Through either a curse of God, which is what the book says, or intermarriage, which is the normal interpretation today, the Lamanites, who are Nephi's older brothers, they're named Laman and Lemuel, so they become the Lamanites. The people who follow Nephi are called the Nephites. The Lamanites get dark skin. They're either cursed by God with dark skin, I'm not joking, or the modern interpretation is they intermarried with people who were already there and therefore got dark skin. And they became the Lamanites. And they were wicked. And the Nephites with white skin were righteous. Lest you think this is really, really racist, it turns on its head about 5 minutes later into the book because the Nephites are so blessed by God for their righteousness that they become so prideful that they become wicked and the Lamanites become righteous. And the Lamanites come back to the Nephites and start teaching them the gospel. So it flips on its head like 3 or 4 times. And then there's these moments where the book says, God doesn't care what color skin you have. Just be righteous, right? So it's this weird mix where you're not quite sure if this is supposed to be racist or not. So that's the Nephites and the Lamanites, and they fight and they kill each other, and then it reads a lot like the war stuff in the Bible, right? They're busy fighting and they're killing each other, and prophets are telling them to repent, and somewhere in America is no clue where. Right? It doesn't tell you where.
Okay.
But it very very specifically mentions all sorts of river names and geography. So people have gone through and tried really hard to match the geography of the Book of Mormon to places. And the winning argument right now among Mormons is Mesoamerica right by Yucatan. But there's also a theory that it's up by the Great Lakes, which is a completely different place, right? But they both have this little narrow neck of land, and it's the narrow neck of land that's described. And either that's the Panama Peninsula or it's up by the Great Lakes. No one knows. And Mormons will yell at each other for hours over this. It's really fun to listen to. But the book doesn't say. And Joseph never said, so... The pinnacle of the book happens in 32, and what happens there is there's a big earthquake. Presumably, Jesus has been crucified, and the prophets are busy. Well, first, there's this great prophecy where it says Christ is going to be born and a new star will rise. Because remember, they're busy prophesying about Christ. And where is he going to be born? Back there where we used to live. And when he is, a new star will rise. And the guys say, well, we're going to kill everyone if the star doesn't rise, the believers. We're going to kill the believers. And then on Christmas morning, the day they're all supposed to die, the star is risen. And there's this great Christmas story in the Book of Mormon that's really fun. We used to read it every Christmas, where all the believers are saved by the rising star. And then 30 years later, there's earthquakes, fire, destruction. Presumably Jesus has been crucified and the whole earth shakes and all sorts of fun stuff. And then several days later, more than 3, because after 3 days they hear a voice from heaven or something, and then they all gather together, and many days later Jesus descends from heaven. Now this is during the 40 days. So what's happening in the Bible here, right? The Bible says that after Jesus is resurrected, he teaches people in the land for 40 days. That's when he teaches the mysterious temple stuff. If you read the Gnostic Christians, the 40-day literature is when all the mystical traditions of Christ, the secret stuff, gets taught, right? The Bible itself leaves out what he taught during the 40 days. But for 40 days he taught people after his resurrection. The Book of Mormon says he was busy teaching people all over after his resurrection, and he appears to the people who believed in him in the Americas. He heals their children. He gives the Sermon on the Mount almost word for word from the New Testament, complete with King James errors and all.
So he re-gives it.
Yeah. Re-gives the Sermon on the Mount to the Nephites and the Lamanites who were there. And now there are no more ites. You get this utopia of racial equality because there are no more ites, we all believe. And for like 100 years, there's nothing but peace because Jesus taught all these people, and they all create this utopia that lasts for 100 years. And then they start getting prideful about their wealth. Some are richer than others. It's always this rich versus poor sort of thing, pride, and everything falls apart. And they start fighting each other. And the Lamanites eventually destroy the Nephites until the last 2, Mormon and Moroni, write the story of their people and bury the record as a warning to our nation and our people to live righteously lest we be destroyed by the same things that destroyed them, including a long discussion of how secret combinations work to help destroy them. Remember, this was in the middle of the anti-Masonry furor, so secret combinations are a big part of the story of how they're destroyed. And it's mostly pride. It's beware of pride is the main theme of the book. And avoid creating ites. So we have a text that is overtly racist in some ways. That's main central point is quit making ites out of yourself. All are like unto God, and quit being so prideful and dividing yourself up. And so again, you can take all sorts of views about what this book means. So that's the Book of Mormon. That's the story in the book, and that's Joseph's creation of the book, and I'm out of time, so I'm just going to quit. I'll tell you what happens to the church after the Book of Mormon next time, and then we'll talk about kind of modern beliefs and practices, and so I think we'll take 2 classes to do this, and should be able to finish it in 2, unless you want 3. I mean, I'll tell you, when I finish the next class, I'll ask you what more you want, and we'll either quit there and go on to Mesoamerica or something, or we'll do more.
We're already in Mesoamerica.
We already are. Well, we're into modern myth about Mesoamerica. I'll actually do real Mesoamerica stuff if you want. But we'll either do more Mormonism or that, or whatever you guys decide you want. But I'll finish this next time.
Thank you.
Okay?
When is next time?
16th, right? Of October is the 3rd Friday.